Kenpachi is a title only provided to those who prove to be the strongest Soul Reaper of their era. There have been 11 Kenpachi in total throughout the history of the Soul Society, including Kenpachi Zaraki, Retsu or Yachiru Unohana, and Kenpachi Kiganjo. But those are just the ones we are shown over the course of the manga, as in the Spirits of Forever With You novel written by Ryoko Narita, which has some debatable canonicity. Kenpachi Kuruyashiki as well as Soya Azashiro are introduced as two Soul Reapers who both held this title for a period during their time as a captain. And while I may briefly cover some of the novel-related content in this video, and won't be my main focus, considering Spirits Are Forever With You still doesn't have any English translations as of the recording of this video, which hopefully changes in the future considering the more recent Can't Feed Your Own World does. There can only be one Kenpachi per era. This is a merciless rule and an unyielding fate that can never be avoided in Unohana's words, and this proves true with the ritual necessary to obtain this wretched name soaked in blood. To hold the title of Kenpachi, one must defeat and kill the previous Kenpachi in battle, with this act traditionally resulting in the new Kenpachi being initiated as captain of 11th Company as well, since defeating a previous captain in the presence of 200 guardsmen is likewise one of the 3 possible ways someone could go about becoming a captain within the 13 court guard companies. While it may seem blasphemous given the things we've seen those holding the name Kenpachi actually do, what if I told you that those holding this title historically have never actually been the strongest of their era? Again, that may sound strange to you at first given the weight of the title and the destiny it carries with it, but upon further examination, the legitimacy of those who carry this title for so many years could potentially be called into question. So let's take a look at what we see the Kenpachi do to see if their donning of the title of the strongest Soul Reaper is in fact justified. The first Kenpachi we're shown on screen is of course captain of 11th Company, Kenpachi Zaraki, whose first display of powers against Ichigo around the time he and his group initially enter the Serite as Ryoka, but then goes on to do battle against fellow captains Kaname Tosen and Komamura Sajin. Ichigo spends most of his fight with Kenpachi simply trying to overcome his fear of Kenpachi's spiritual pressure, but Kenpachi arguably has more to show later on in his aforementioned battles against Tosen and Komamura, considering their 2 captain class opponents, and the ease with which Kenpachi demonstrates the ability to overcome Tosen's Bankai and put him in a near-death state with just 2 slashes is something I have a hard time believing many other Soul Reapers at this point in the story would be capable of, especially when considering that afterwards, when Komamura likewise recognizes the threat Kenpachi presents and uses his Bankai, Kenpachi recognizes Komamura as well, stating he will then go all out, meaning he was suppressed when he performed as impressive as he did against Tosen. This fight was cut short by Komamura fleeing the scene concerned about Yamamoto's battle against Shunsui and Ugatake, however a problem is already present. While Kenpachi did in fact attain the title through the traditional method of defeating and killing the previous Kenpachi, which would be Kenpachi Kiganjo, Kenpachi himself still is not the strongest Soul Reaper upon the time this ritual is completed, considering that in the Soul Society arc when he would naturally be stronger, Kenpachi has an even fight with Ichigo or really just loses to him by his own admission, with this Ichigo still being weaker than the likes of Shikai Byakuya as the two confront each other on the bridge and Sogyoku Hill. Yoruichi then declares that she will make Ichigo stronger than Byakuya within 3 days, which does in fact come true as over the course of their entire fight on Sogyoku Hill, Bankai Ichigo is essentially flexing on Byakuya, overwhelming him in speed multiple times, and by the time Byakuya is able to damage Ichigo in any meaningful capacity, Ichigo is already growing weakened and losing his speed. This would mean that characters like Ichigo or even Byakuya, who can at the very least severely wound Shikai Ichigo on Sogyoku Hill, would be stronger than Kenpachi and more worthy of the title at the time of the Soul Society arc. But the Soul Society arc is just his first appearance. Let's continue on to the Arrancar arc and see if anything changes for Kenpachi as this story progresses, as he does take on 2 Espada throughout the course of the battle in Hoikomundo, being both Noyatora and Yami. Though Noyatora as the 5th Espada is in fact capable of damaging Kenpachi, Kenpachi is shown to more so shrug these hits off as his eye patch and therefore his limiters have been removed, with Noyatora not holding up too well the moment Kenpachi decides to take him seriously and utilize his 2-handed kendo strikes, despite the fact he allegedly has the hardest hero and therefore the best defense among the Espada. This adds up, however, when considering that Kenpachi would later on fight Yami Largo, who is known as the Zero Espada, surpassing characters like Grimmjow, Noyatora, and Ulquiorra in the words of Databook 3 Unmasked. But what's more so important to us about this encounter with Yami is how Kenpachi and Byakuya display a level of relativity to one another over the course of the battle. I've spoken about this in previous videos, but many believe there to be some sort of a wide disparity between Kenpachi and Byakuya at the time of their fight against Yami, but this is not the case. These beliefs stem from Kenpachi's perception that at one point he had Yami on his deathbed with only 1 strike away from defeat, Meanwhile, Byakuya does not and thinks that Yami has more fight in him, meaning that Byakuya would have to put in more work to beat Yami than Kenpachi would himself. However, this is again not the case when considering that similarly to Yami and his poor use of Pesquisa, Kenpachi likewise is not the best at detecting spiritual pressure, which is something he himself admits when talking to himself, as well as something Byakuya points out and he does not refute. So his analysis of Byakuya's abilities in this scenario doesn't necessarily hold any sort of weight. Not only this, but Databook 3 Unmasked also makes some interesting remarks regarding this three-way clash between Byakuya, Kenpachi, and Yami, stating that Kenpachi and Byakuya both found Yami to be a complete and total bore. The duo more so interested in doing battle against each other than they were fighting the actual enemy in front of them, which while impressive for Byakuya seeing as how Kenpachi returns to the Soul Society wounded with his eye patch removed, doesn't look so good for Kenpachi fulfilling the role of the strongest Soul Reaper, as although he appears to have closed the major gap between himself and Byakuya that was present in the Soul Society arc, both he and Byakuya are now still weaker than Ichigo when he leaves to Fate Karakura to assist the 13 Court Guard squads and the Vizards against Aizen. Let me explain. As Ichigo and Unohana are traversing through the Garganta to get to Fate Karakura town, the two have a conversation regarding the state of Ichigo's spirit energy, where he himself states that his bridge across the Garganta is worse than Unohana's because although Orihime managed to heal his wounds, Orihime's healing is still slow at restoring spiritual energy specifically, and he left the top of Las Noches anyway while weakened to protect Rukia from Yami. And this is important because Unohana prefaces this conversation by stating that she and Ichigo are similar in terms of their spiritual energy. Some may say that Ichigo's performance against Yami would contradict the idea of Ichigo being at Unohana's level, but when he first steps out from above the canopy of Las Noches, Ichigo completely embarrasses Yami up until he gets the strange feeling he gets from using his hollow mask, alongside being concerned by that feeling hindering his performance. Not only this, but Byakuya only tells Ichigo to leave Hueco not because he is weak, but rather because it is his duty as Deputy Soul Reaper of Karakura Town to protect it, and therefore that's where he should be instead. This is of further note because while Ichigo did reach this new level above Kenpachi and Byakuya, he still has trouble fighting against Gin in the world of the living, which would constitute another person being a stronger Soul Reaper than Kenpachi at this point. Kenpachi and Byakuya are also still a far cry from some of the higher-end captains like Shunsui or Ukitake, who Databook 2 hypes up to possess a spiritual pressure unmatched by their peers or predecessors. And Shunsui in particular later on demonstrates the capacity to fight on par with some of the stronger members of the Sternritter army in the war arc, despite the fact he is rather lazy and does not train, being open with the fact he has not spoken with his Zanpakuto for quite some time, meaning Shunsui and Ukitake, who was portrayed to be his equal, have been war arc level characters since the beginning all the way back in the Soul Society arc, and thus still stronger than this Kenpachi as well. However, this leads into another argument regarding the exact nature of the Kenpachi title and how it is achieved. Kenpachi are usually known to be the strongest Soul Reapers of their era, which then begs the question, what do we consider to be Kenpachi's era, and who is a part of that era that could potentially contradict his title? We know Kenpachi has to have been a captain for less than 100 years, since at the time of Turn Back the Pendulum, Kenpachi Kiganjo was still captain of 11th Company, as Shinji complains to Love about the fact he's been skipping out on another captain's meeting. We also know it could be a bit over 15 years because the new Thousand Year Blood War anime displays that Kenpachi was in fact a captain at the time of everything but the rain, meaning it would naturally have to predate Ichigo's birth. But taking another look at Turn Back the Pendulum, we also see that Soul Reapers who were captains alongside Kenpachi at the time of the events of the manga, like Mayuri, Gin, Soifan, and Byakuya, are either children or have yet to attain any position within the 13 Court Guard squads, with Byakuya's father Sojin serving as lieutenant to his grandfather Ginrei. Shunsui also takes note of how Ukitake, Yamamoto, Unohana, and himself are the only Soul Reapers to serve as captains for over 100 years, meaning that if you purely regulate the Kenpachi title to only include Soul Reapers a part of that Kenpachi's era, characters like Shunsui and Ukitake may not fall under this category, but others such as Gin or Byakuya more so would. One could argue that Kenpachi has yet to unlock his true strength at this point in the Arrancar arc, which is true, so let's now look towards the War arc and see if Kenpachi becoming fully realized has made him any more worthy of the title. Although already being considered a special threat by Yuha before any of the developments made in preparation for the battle against the Quincy, Kenpachi gets even stronger, now synchronized with his Zanpakuto and utilizing his Shikai for the first time against the likes of Gremmy, managing to defeat him even while wearing his eye patch. Some deem this to be impressive because Gremmy proclaims himself to be the strongest Sternritter, but this isn't exactly true, and Kenpachi has much more noteworthy showings later against a much stronger Quincy, Gerard Valkyrie. Gerard is a member of the Schutzstaffel, Yuha's royal guard who are known to be his strongest warriors, And on top of this, Gerard's Shrift the Miracle only serves to make him bigger, stronger, and faster each time he is wounded or seriously damaged. With Shikai, Kenpachi manages to put up a good fight against V1 Gerard to the point that he wants to focus purely on him and quickly shuts down Toshiro's attempt to interfere in their fight. But that proves to not be enough, resulting in Kenpachi achieving his Bankai for the first time, which decimates this V1 Gerard, pulling entire limbs off with just his mouth. Due to his ability though, this only makes Gerard even stronger, and Kenpachi's body has a difficult time attempting to keep up, with his arm tearing wide open. However, as evident without any remarks on my part, this is still good for Kenpachi when taking a look at the reputation of the Schutzstaffel as unrivaled among the other Quincy, but even more so when facing against Gerard, who ranks among his teammates quite favorably, which I went more so in depth about in my video ranking the Schutzstaffel that you can watch here. The issue still present, however, is immediately after Kenpachi's Bankai takes a toll on his body, causing him to collapse, Toshiro then reaches the final stage of his own Bankai, complete with his adult form, and then proceeds to somehow perform better against this stronger V2 Gerard than Bankai Kenpachi, negating the effects of his sword with his freezing and reacting to him on numerous occasions. While it is true that Toshiro isn't able to damage Gerard the same way Bankai Kenpachi did to version 1 Gerard, this is solely because Gerard has immunity to the elements and therefore negates Toshiro's freezing, which is a large part of his arsenal. This also makes plenty of narrative sense considering that this is Toshiro's big moment where he lives up to all the hype he's been receiving as a prodigy, who would one day surpass even the likes of Shunsui. And it would be pretty anticlimactic if right after we see Bankai Kenpachi fight version 1 Gerard and he gets even stronger, to then follow that up with a stronger Gerard fighting a weaker character. If we're talking about a direct one-on-one confrontation between Bankai Kenpachi and adult Toshiro, it more than likely ends with Kenpachi being frozen, since Toshiro is clearly faster and can freeze much larger targets like Gerard with speed to spare. But aside from Toshiro, Ichigo himself has become a true Soul Reaper after his training with the Zero Division and learning the truth about his Zanpakuto, then going on to fight Yuha, who is considerably stronger than his Royal Guard soldiers, meaning that even by the end of the war arc, Kenpachi still is not the strongest Soul Reaper. Can't Feed Your Own World also doesn't do Kenpachi many favors either, as although the opening pages of Volume 3 refer to him as the strongest Soul Reaper, which may mean he has surpassed adult Toshiro after the war arc, throughout the novel it is heavily implied that Soul Reapers like Yamamoto and Ichigo are still unreachable benchmarks, despite new faces introduced in the novel like Tokinana Tsuneyashiro and his puppet Hikone, who was a candidate for the position of Soul King. But we've talked about Kenpachi Zaraki long enough. Let's transition now to talking about the first Kenpachi, Yachiru Unohana. We don't know a lot about how the Kenpachi title came to be, considering Unohana is the first. Specifically, we don't know if Unohana herself forged the name and the conditions, or if someone else created the name and conditions, then gave them to her. But right off the bat, and similarly to Kenpachi, she in fact does not meet the guidelines to hold this title. Even if we restrict the criteria to Soul Reapers purely from her era, Yamamoto, who fought alongside Unohana in the first war against the Quincy and forged the Gote 13, is very clearly stronger than her. I've talked about all these statements and lore surrounding Yamamoto's power in my Yamamoto vs. Aizen video, which you can watch here. But to quickly summarize, not only is Ryujin Jaka known as the ultimate Zanpakuto, being the oldest and strongest in the Soul Society's history, but other Soul Reapers like Aizen also acknowledge Yamamoto as the only captain in Fate Karakura Town left with any real ability, despite the fact Unohana is right next to them. Not only this, but Yuha likewise gives Yamamoto praise, stating that despite the original Gote 13 containing nothing but violent criminals and cold-hearted killers, including Unohana, Yamamoto is the one who kept them in line with his power, a true beast with a sword. But I know a lot of you are already more than aware that Unohana isn't as strong as Yamamoto, as this matchup has been touched upon quite a bit by this statement she makes during her fight against Kenpachi in the Mukin, proclaiming, "I am strong, stronger than everybody except you." Given that we've already covered how Yamamoto is stronger than her, this statement obviously has limits or context behind it and doesn't mean literally everyone. But what is that limit, and where does that context begin and end? I personally believe this statement is solely referring to those who she has good reason to believe are participating in the war against the Quincy, and let me run some examples by you as to why I think this is the case. The easiest is the fact she obviously isn't stronger than Aizen, who would count under everyone otherwise, but she has no idea Shunsui plans to free Aizen later on in the war arc to use him. Taking this statement at face value would then likewise have to mean that she is stronger than every single one of the Squad Zero members as well, which clearly isn't the case considering she has no scaling to the Schutzstaffel, who Uetsu performs quite admirably against when they first appear at the Royal Palace, and although they are suppressed at the time, the statements declaring them to be Yuha's strongest soldiers and unrivaled among the Quincy still apply at the time, putting them above characters like Grimmy, who fights Kenpachi and Shikai after he kills Unohana in just his base form. She obviously isn't stronger than Ichibei either, considering his utterly dominant showing against Yuha up until he regains the power of his almighty eyes, and even without the disparity in stats taken into account, Unohana just has no answer whatsoever to the abilities of Ichimonji, his Zanpakuto. This context of Soul Reapers who would participate in the war applies here as well, since she has no grounds or reason to think that the Quincy will even make it to the Royal Palace from the Serite to fight Squad Zero in the first place. Another great example is Fullbring Ichigo, which while Yuha does outclass him for the most part, Ichigo is still able to damage him, and he considers Ichigo to be more of a threat to him than the one-armed Yamamoto, who is still stronger than Unohana. But it would make total sense if instead Unohana believed Ichigo wouldn't be participating in the war against the Quincy, since she and Shunsui approached Central 46 under the assumption that Byakuya and the others who went up to the Royal Palace, which includes Ichigo, may not be coming back. Byakuya also holds the opinion that Ichigo shouldn't at all be involved in the war, nor should he even be in the Soul Society to begin with, considering that he is just a human, and he finds it to be a deep embarrassment to ask for his help in the fight. And similarly to Byakuya, Unohana is more so traditional and a firm believer in the Soul Society's laws, as she is shocked by Yamamoto deciding to restore Ichigo's power in the Fullbring arc, alongside Ichigo's request to bury Ginjo in the world of the living in the anime. And she also refuses to show her subordinate Hanataro any leniency after he aids the Ryoka, which leads me to the conclusion that she would more than likely not believe, and if anything be outright against, the idea of Ichigo participating in the war. Can't Fear Your Own World also implies that Shunsui on some level may have been aware of Ichibei's plans to turn Ichigo into the Soul King, which he may have shared with Unohana before the two decided to approach Central 46. Speaking of Shunsui, however, and this may be the weirdest for people to grasp, but I believe Shunsui likewise falls under this criteria as well. I'm sure many of you are already perplexed by this idea, since it's a commonly accepted consensus that Unohana is stronger than Shunsui, and while Shunsui does put Unohana up against Kenpachi for the training to make him stronger rather than himself, this is because it is intended to be a lesson in Zanjutsu, or the art of the sword, and not only does Unohana go by the name Yachiru, meaning 8,000 styles to represent the countless sword techniques she's mastered, but she also has the healing capabilities necessary for the additional purposes of the training, which was to kill him, heal him from the brink of death, then repeat the process until his body remembers its true strength from when he first fought and defeated Unohana as a child. So Shunsui himself isn't really fit for the role of training Kenpachi specifically for what they're trying to achieve, and this statement here where the two captains are negotiating with Central 46 is more so Shunsui saying that Unohana is a better swordsman more suited for the job than himself, in addition to any of the other moments that could imply she is stronger than him, mostly being comedy based, sort of like a Goku and Vegeta being scared of their wives kind of thing. And Unohana likewise scares Ichigo in the Garganta right before saying the two of them are similar in spirit energy. As I mentioned earlier, Unohana has no scaling to any Schutzstaffel members and dies as she is admitting inferiority to a Kenpachi who at the time is beneath them, while Shunsui himself performs formidably against Lele Baro, who is given position as leader of the Schutzstaffel without any disputes. Within their fight, Shunsui demonstrates superior speed to Lele on multiple occasions and causes him to open his other eye 3 times, which in Lele's own words, only happens when he falls into crisis during battle. Some may argue that this battle between Lele and Shunsui is more so hacks based rather than Shunsui physically comparing to Lele, but this line of logic ignores how hacks abilities operate in Bleach, where if someone has a much stronger spiritual pressure than yourself, they could just straight up negate your abilities, meaning Shunsui's abilities would have to scale to Lele to a certain degree, and not only this, but some of Shunsui's abilities are also quite blatantly based on one's own physical capabilities, since they are children's games like Bodhidharma Falls Down, where you have to be quick enough to not get caught moving, or Kage Oni, where you once again have to be quick enough to prevent your shadow from being stepped on first. While it is true Lele eventually defeated Shunsui, this is more so due to the fact his Volt Standig hard countered Shunsui's Bankai with its regenerative capabilities, and the now Zanpakuto was more so suited for that sort of opponent. Regardless, Unohana vs Shunsui is a topic for its own video, and speaking of Shunsui's Bankai leads me perfectly into some of the reasons why Unohana wouldn't believe Shunsui would be participating in the 1,000-year Blood War. A good one being that he would more than likely have to resort to using his Bankai. Shunsui's Bankai is interesting for a variety of different reasons, but one of its properties that's most important to us now is how it can catch multiple people in its activation. This is implied when he planned to use it against Stark, but is outright stated by himself when he gets ready to use it against Lele, wondering if the others have gotten far enough away yet, then sensing Nanao and apologizing if she gets caught within the Bankai. This would mean putting Shunsui in a battle where he may have to use it against much stronger characters like Yuha is not ideal, since he would have to take out multiple other captains, lieutenants, or miscellaneous seated officers with him in the process. And this is similar to how it was considered very dangerous for Yamamoto to be on the front lines against Yuha using his own Bankai, which Unohana herself was wary of. Another point that leads me to believe Unohana does not expect Shunsui to fight is that she is once again traditional, and it is frowned upon for the Captain General to be involved in the battles of his men. This is stated by Yamamoto himself when he has to step out against Aeon in Fake Karakura Town, and it is implied in the first invasion when the captains currently fighting around the Serite feel they have to work even harder because their captain general is participating, with Komamura declaring that court guard officers lying on the ground while the captain general is on his feet to be an indefensible shame. But we've talked about this for quite a while already, and I think it's pretty clear at this point that this statement doesn't hold much water when held under scrutiny and looked at with proper context for it to make sense. We've already discussed how Yamamoto prevents Unohana from being the strongest of her own era, but even characters outside of that era such as Aizen, Ichigo, Gin, and arguably Shunsui still prevent her from claiming the title of Kenpachi later on as well. Something else that makes Unohana a strange case to me is, who is the second Kenpachi and how did they become Kenpachi? While Unohana believes a child Kenpachi was the one worthy of the name following their battle, she herself was never challenged for the title and killed in a duel, so how was the second Kenpachi appointed? We are never told in the manga, novels, or any supplementary material like databooks 1 through 3, so my guess would have to be that Unohana may have willingly given up her title shortly after her first fight with Kenpachi and began honing her healing capabilities whenever she was shifted to the position of captain of Squad 4 from the previous Squad 11. This isn't too far-fetched either, considering that, if you believe spirits are forever with you to be canon, the title of Kenpachi was taken from Soya Azashiro and passed down to his lieutenant after Azashiro was left in prison in the Muken, rather than being traditionally killed in a one-on-one, and this was done to preserve the Kenpachi tradition. However, like Unohana as well as Kenpachi, the one following him being Kenpachi Kiganjo was likewise never truly the strongest Soul Reaper either, considering that he was killed by Kenpachi after he suppressed himself following his fight against Unohana, and is more than likely weaker than he would be in the Soul Society arc. Kiganjo is still noteworthy in the fact that he defeated Azashiro's lieutenant, who took on his title in order to become the 10th Kenpachi. This is directly confirmed in Turn Back the Pendulum when Love tells Shinji that it's the previous Kenpachi's fault for losing to Kiganjo, that they have to deal with him now. This means the only Kenpachi we know for sure have attained the title through the traditional means are Soya Azashiro, who defeated the 7th Kenpachi Kuruyashiki, Kenpachi Kiganjo, who defeated the 9th Kenpachi, and Kenpachi Zaraki, who defeated Kenpachi Kiganjo to become the 11th Kenpachi. I would like to clarify, however, that although I spent the admittedly overwhelming majority of this video talking about how the Kenpachi don't necessarily live up to their title of the strongest Soul Reaper, they still have their moments and should not be undersold or considered weak by any means. Kenpachi himself, as mentioned prior, has excellent showings against other captains or captain class opponents such as the Espada, mainly ones on the higher end as well, such as Noyatora, who is known for allegedly having the hardest hero in the Espada, or Yami in his Zero form that surpasses his Arrancar peers in their entirety, and all before Kenpachi attains his Shikai within the early parts of the war arc and goes on to do battle with the Schutzstaffel later. While Unohana herself doesn't match up too well against Kenpachi once he regains his true strength that he lost from their original fight, the fact she could initially dominate Kenpachi so easily at all in spite of his aforementioned demonstrations of power is more than notable. Unohana has also been recognized by the likes of 7th Kenpachi Kuruyashiki, who had previously been invited to join Squad 0 at the Royal Palace but refused, partly because of his own belief that he isn't cut out for the job, and partly because he wanted to keep himself available to potential challengers who may seek to take his title from him. As a side note, this is kind of a weird subject in terms of Spirits Are Forever With You canon, since we know the members of Squad 0 are specifically recognized by the Soul King and chosen to join for having provided some sort of notable contribution to the history of the Soul Society, which as far as I can tell, Kuruyashiki meets neither of these criteria. But Central 46 additionally banned the use of Kuruyashiki's Bankai within the walls of the Serite, and if that all sounds impressive to you, consider that he met his end directly at the hands of his successor, Soya Azashiro. But that's about all I really have to say regarding the topic today. I have plenty of other Bleach content on my channel and plan to make much more in the future, especially in correspondence with the third core of the anime airing currently. So subscribe for free if you don't want to miss that or just want to be notified of what I might get up to in the future, such as when I upload or stream. Like this video to support both the channel and myself, as well as let me know that this is the type of content you want to see. Comment down below if I missed anything or with any suggestions you may have for the future. Thank you all for watching, and have a great rest of your day.